the topic is talking about ideas that the artist can have that may be a good idea to continue to a larger format, and some ideas that just live as studies or smaller works and don't have what it takes sometimes to make a larger painting. So I have a number of slides, and they're all of my works. I don't want to get into anybody else's works, other contemporary artists or past masters to show, but I think you'll get the idea from what I'm going to show as a visual. Here's the first slide. And this was a study that was done down in the southern part of the country. I believe it was in Florida. And it was just, I found this back area of a building along a coastal waterway that had this wonderful light in the afternoon. As much as I really enjoyed painting this, and I like the painting, it's probably only an 8 by 10, I believe, as far as the size. I don't see it being painted as a larger subject matter. The only way that I could possibly see it, and I had thought about doing something to add to the idea on this, was possibly to have, let's say, a person, if you can think of sometimes, not necessarily down south, but people that might be relaxing in the afternoon, and let's say there was a chair that might be, a person would be leaning back in a chair against the wall, and maybe playing a fiddle or even a banjo, and just relaxing in the late of the day, more or less after hours, and coming back home and maybe after work and just relaxing, as some people do. And just a casual thing of coming to the back of someone's business or back of a house and just relaxing. I thought I could add possibly a figure to that. I've yet to do that. I've worked up a few studies, and I just don't care. But as this painting is by itself, I feel it is what it is with the little 8 by 10. And I don't think it can go any further than that. And you can maybe see some of these other paintings that I have, and ones that may make a larger painting. This is another one that I feel is just good as it is. To make a larger painting of this, I think it needs more. Maybe it needs more. This is in Lake Como. It was actually done. I had a small study of looking across Lake Como later in the, it might have been even actually, now that I see the light, where the light is, this probably was a mid-morning, and this is looking at, if you've ever been there, this is looking at the peninsula across the way here of where Bellagio is, and they have a number of different little excursion boats and little boats that take you around various places on Lake Como. And this is an old historic boat, and I got a few pictures of it, and when I got home I took the study and did another, I think it's only an 8 by 10, maybe a 9 by 12, and just as an idea to take the study I had and put this boat in it to see how it would work. And again, I think it is what it is as far as a small piece, but will not live on its own or won't live to be a bigger painting. Here's a little study up in Estes Park in Colorado, a little lake called Dream Lake. And I did a number of paintings up there. This was a small little study that I felt it had some possibilities, especially being there and seeing things. There's a lot of, just to the right of this, there's a lot of sunken logs in the water. And there was a big grass area here, and this is looking across the lake. It's a small little lake. If you've ever been there, it's a great little, it's an easy hike up from a parking lot. And there's I forget the mountain, there's a huge mountain, a majestic mountain that is above here. I just took a lower view, not even having the mountain in, and just concentrating on the lake itself and some of the rocks, and almost an abstract. If you think of these shapes and angles, another angle here, and so forth, looking at these various shapes and how they work, light and dark pattern against another shape here with the grass down below. like I say, almost, if you think of it, almost an abstract. But from that, I started to, and as I always mention, and I suggest that the artist should do when they're out painting on location, is to take a lot of reference shots of your area that might aid you when you get back home at another time when you want to develop something more of this idea. And I really felt this idea had legs to it, and so I later on did a painting a little bit different, but I added more of the grass. I invented a little bit more of this grass in the foreground with some shadow and light effect and some of the logs, and you still have the rocks and so forth going into the background, as the little study had. A little bit different light effect on it. I was up there pretty much all day long doing a variety of paintings and light effects. So I took that particular scene and developed that painting, and also another one that came from it was this one that was a little bit further to the right. It had this interesting element, but I came in closer and added put the log element in closer to where some of these rocks were here. And of course, adjusting the rocks to make them get an interesting pattern and negative area between them, but yet using the sunken logs for line and direction and movement, and then still taking you back to this, keeping that higher horizon line. I didn't change from that at all in this, from the initial study idea to this one. This one's a little bit lower, and to this one here, this one being a vertical. So it was fun to explore different formats and come up with something that I felt was worthy of a large painting. I actually feel this one, I've got more of this whole lake that I feel even this whole scene could easily be a let's say a 40 by 60 or something, if I do, or even this size could be a big vertical. This is a 20 by 16 as far as the size, so it's not really that huge. But I feel occasionally some subject matters, I can almost vision them very large, where you would be standing in front of it and almost feeling like you could step into the scene, where a smaller painting just sometimes doesn't. Again, going back to this one, I don't think I would want to have that one very large and being able to feel like I could step into it. So again, sometimes it's a gut reaction, but it's more of this is subject oriented, but there's there's some atmosphere sometimes to scenes that become interesting. Here's a little study from an alleyway in France, and I added the figure later on. I did the study on location and these neat archways and all the different angles of the buildings and a light effect in the morning and a little archway back here. There wasn't a cafe, but I added some umbrellas to give a sense of a cafe and a person. There's always people walking dogs, and I probably, as far as I remember, I think I got some shots of people walking through the alleyway, and I could have made it very congested, but I thought just a one person with a dog and walking through, and then you could see some people in the background. And again, I added to sometimes in Europe, they in some places early in the morning, they will wash down their sidewalks. They keep everything very clean and pristine, and sometimes it's wet and it has this wonderful reflections to it. And I recall that. I didn't get that in the study, but I added that also later on with the figure and threw in a couple of figures back here, and it made the whole piece interesting. But I don't feel this again would be, let's say, a large 20 by 30 or 30 by 20, whatever. But I do feel sometimes that subject matter of an alleyway and looking down, it could be a possibility. And here's another example of an alleyway that I did, and I've used this one before. This was from Spain. I did a small little study, and it was just a quick down and dirty, dapple light effect is what I was attracted to. All this light on this wonderful wall that was going, it was a little bit of a circular wall. Had this wonderful arch and fence ways that went into the back of another property, and this narrow little cobblestone walkway that I added the figure of a mother holding a child and walking and holding a little baby in her arms and walking with another child in her other arm and walking. I forget if I have her walking into. I think she's walking into the set and not out. It doesn't make any difference, but the figure adds a scale to it. All shadow. This whole painting is probably 80% shadow and only 20% light. And this wonderful foliage that came up. And here's one that I feel this could easily translate to a much larger scene. And there's something about the kind of romance of light and shadow, the architecture, the interesting perspective, this big clean sweep of hardly anything going back to this area. I did a smaller vertical of this scene for one of the demos and one of the projects for this whole workshop, and as you probably also saw that in the past. But this was the beginning of some of the other scenes that have come from that. Here's another painting that I have. I did this on location. I took the shots, and the shots ended up into my library. So this was my painting on location of this winter scene, and I added the figures in later on when I got back home. And you can see I dragged across. I had all blue in here, but I felt it was this whole area at one time and was void of anything up here. And I just didn't add that in this scene when I first painted it. And I got home, I added the figures in, and that worked out for me. But later on, looking at it, I felt this lower area was still too void of anything to do with colors and values up, or not values, but colors up here. So I dragged across, you can see it's dragged across dry paint, a dry area, dragged across some areas that just help to harmonize and bring this in. To that lower area. But here's again another scene that I don't feel this is, it maybe could look good, but I don't have a really good sense that this needs to live any larger than what it was. I think it was a 912 painting, and it could go maybe up a little larger, but sometimes this project, or maybe not sometimes, but this project or this workshop, talking about taking a study and developing it into a larger painting, I don't prescribe that people work any larger than 8 by 24, especially if you're not familiar with working that big and the complications that come with it. But I do sometimes talk about think of your ideas when you're comparing your ideas. Think of your idea and do you think it could look good as a huge 40 by 60 or even larger than that. And I mentioned sometimes going to museums and standing in front of a Thomas Moran or Frederick Church painting that is maybe 15 feet by 25 feet huge, and you could almost step into the scene. And I'm sure we've all, you can relate to that. And some scenes, I try to think of, would this scene look good that size? And I just don't see it. I think it's fine as it is, but maybe with some work, it could be something different. Here's a painting that I believe. This was only a 11 by 14, but I have done a larger painting of this, and this is just a small little intimate stream right off the road with sunlight that was coming from right to left. And what I was attracted to is how the sun was hitting earlier in the morning, hitting on an angle more to this, really warming this up. But because this was on a more of a flat angle, is getting sun, but more ambient light from the sky. So this is a cool warm, and this is a warm warm. And then, of course, you have then shadow. right here. Then you have reflective light bouncing into the shadow. So it has a lot of light effects that I was attracted to. Like say, driving down the road sometimes or walking down a path, you see something, you go, wow, I like that. And I first saw this, what I first saw driving down the road before I stopped to paint this, was this interesting positive, negative. And then, of course, the shadow and light effect. Then after I got out and looked at this and started to study it and start to paint it, then you start to see some of these subtle reflective light elements, and you start to compare what's in sunlight on a flat shape versus sunlight on more of an angle. This is a little bit more of a snowbank that's on an angle, picking up more of the sun, again, at a direct angle versus this one here, as I mentioned. So those things sometimes aren't visible right away, but the more that I've found these things, found these subjects I was attracted to, sat and painted them, the more I started to understand these relationships. And so that the next time I start driving down the road, I start to think of the time I painted this scene and all the subtleties, so that now when I'm driving down the road, I will look for more of those opportunities to possibly translate and then share with an audience. But here's another one that I feel could easily be a larger painting, even though it's very intimate. It's almost on the abstract. You do have things you recognize, the grasses and the snowbank and so forth, and a little stream. But I could almost see this as being a 40 by 60. It could work out possibly very, very interesting. Let's go to the next slide here. Here's one from Cresta Butte. I did a plein air event out there years ago. This was actually the first painting that I did when I was there, and it was just a neat little old shack and tin-roofed building in the outback area around Cresta Butte with the mountains in the background sky. And it was this time of year when they had all these wonderful little prairie flowers that were starting to bloom. And I just found it to be such a wonderful harmony from the sky to some of the cool reflective light and shadows on the roof line. And that's what attracted me. And then, of course, the angles and the other shapes that are flat. Of course, the organic shapes, all versus geometric shapes, was again an interesting attraction. Would this become a larger painting? I think it could, excuse me, but I think if I was to do this as the larger painting, I'd have either much more to the right and have this building, let's say if I did more of almost a 1-to-2 proportion scene, and had the building maybe in the first 2/3, and then the last, first third, I should say, and then the last third maybe was very quiet and didn't have much there. Or again, maybe it could be where the building is over this way, and you have this big slope coming down, and then maybe I have a return on that mountain here, return here before it goes down behind the building, before you see the other mountain here. And what I am always thinking about is these angles. Those are the ones that help make me decide if this would be better as a square or as a vertical or as a possible more of a horizontal, being even more of a 1-to-2, maybe even a 1-to-3 proportion. So I feel it has, as it stands itself right now, I feel it doesn't quite have enough to just translate as it is, but this one I would probably take into the Mod 2 direction and start to play with some format options to give it more space around it. So anyway, let's go to the next one. Here's a fun painting that so there's a local area, and being a farm boy, and we had pigs on the farm, I do like some of the subject matters. When I was a farm boy, I never thought that I would paint pigs and make a painting out of it. But what I was attracted to was looking over the edge of this fence, and the fence here with the slats in it was allowing the light later in the afternoon light to flow through and capture the pigs that were just sleeping. You know, if you want to paint some animals, sometimes animals, try to paint cows, they'll come up and get in your face. Chickens won't stand still, but sometimes pigs, when they're resting, they make for perfect models. And again, what I was attracted to in this was the light effect. Some of the things I added, there might have been only, I think at the time when I painted this, there was only one streak of light, but I added the 2 streaks of light and some interesting shapes here. I was playing a lot with the shapes and little dapple light hitting here and there on some of the pigs in the background. And then I think even this shape did not exist, but I needed something here to break up and bring into this so we didn't have just all light here. And so all these little light spots are very important. The shadow on the whole belly of this pig, light hitting on the feet. And then, of course, it was just a fun painting it with some palette knife and various tools to make the effect interesting, the visual effect interesting. But again, would this make a big, large painting? Probably not. I don't see this as a subject matter that I would do a 40 by 60 or 60 by 40 of. This is on the backside of Catalina Island, a place that I painted often. It's a location that's called Shark Harbor. Usually there's big surf. The ocean's to the left here, obviously, and there's big surf rolling in here, and there's just big waves that crash in here. Back over this way, if you were to turn to your left, there's a big peninsula goes out with some big rocks, very atmospheric when the waves are coming in. It creates a really interesting look. And I've painted here so many times that I was out with a bunch of artist friends painting here again for a day. And, you know, I looked at some of these other scenes, and as much as they were interesting, I went, gosh, I painted that scene before, I painted this scene over here, I painted this before. Sometimes you're looking for something different. I just happened to be standing on the beach, and I turned around and looked this way, and this gentle surf coming in was creating this wonderful pattern on the wet sand, and then the rest of the sand coming up here. And then there was a bunch of rocks that were in the water, and big rocks and part of the coast there. And I just let that be some shapes on the higher horizon line, formatted little 8 by 10. And this is what I came up with. And so as the waves, I watched this for a while, watching the waves coming in, and I started to draw on my canvas a pattern. I'm not saying I drew it exactly like this, but I drew kind of a general pattern of more wave than sand. I didn't want it to run off completely here. I wanted to have a connection of the wet sand. And then there was kelp that was being pushed up, and as the waves came up and then it would come down, it would sometimes rush around, or in this case the wave is coming in yet, and the wave is rushing around some of the kelp that is sitting here from one of the last waves that pushed up debris and kelp, you know. So that became the interesting painting, and from that came the idea of doing a larger work that I did. This was a 30 by 30, and it probably doesn't quite have the energy. I still like this one. Sometimes these are so unique, and I think some of the cool notes here, but I wanted this one here to live on its own, be its own painting, versus just mimicking the small one, and that's what I ended up here. And actually I've done a couple, but this I think was one of the more successful ones. I love the little bit of the wave hitting back here, a little reflection on the surf, white surf in here getting closer. The white surf is becoming somewhat translucent occasionally, looking down into the wet sand. I'm trying to get some reflections in the wet sand here, and sometimes the sand looks different, reflecting. There's a big hillside back here that was somewhat lit up, and I didn't really give a lot of care to that. I just went with more atmosphere on that versus the rocks that were in the foreground. So that idea here led to I felt even when I painted it, I just had the anticipation of eventually doing something larger with it, and it's almost a big abstract when you think of the simple shapes that are here. versus. I mean, there's reality to it. You can relate to the shapes. You know what they are, but it's more of an abstract composition and spatial arrangement that I was very interested in keeping. Here's a scene from a little study that I did on location from Chioggia, Italy. It's a little area just south of Venice. It's where Edgar Payne did a lot of trips there years ago. He was one of the California Impressionists. He went there because of the beauty. It's a little fishing village with a few canals. Nothing like Venice, but it has some canals. Has a wonderful people. It's a fishing community, fishing village. Has a lot of historic sardine boats. That's what a lot of the fishermen went out into the Adriatic and fished for sardines and other fish that they could catch. But there's little canals that have these wonderful little boats in them that they're very proud of their boats, and they paint them up with these wonderful bright colors. And I just felt that to be so interesting against this wall, a little step ladder going up. And then there was an area that was a restaurant connected from probably an alleyway in the back area here was the area where that they could serve people and they could look over the canal. And so that became a fun painting to set up and paint. I was inspired by it. Would it make a larger painting? I just don't think it has the wherewithal. Even though I like the idea, I just don't think the idea is worthy of a larger painting. Here's another little study that I did in a workshop, and it was I was looking around for something to paint in a forest area and saw this wonderful dapple light, and so that was the study for the morning of showing this dapple light on a great big old tree, and then some other trees in the background, and you could see the energy, the quickness, the spontaneity of painting the piece. And here again, it lives as it is. I think it was an 8 by 10. It lives as it is, or 10 by 8. It lives as it is, but I don't feel it would be worthy, at least in this format, of or this composition of a larger painting. Again, I think you'd have to go more to the right and maybe a little bit to the left and back off and get more of the woods, and then maybe this could be the light effect could still be part of the woods, and I think then it could possibly have some life and be a candidate for a larger painting. Whoops, let's see here. Where was I? Let's see, I was right here. And let's go to another one here. This was one of my daughter when she was in high school, so this is quite an old piece. And I did a little painting of her on location out on a stream and sitting on some rocks. And here again, I think if I was to do this as a larger painting, it might need more to the right and to the left. But as it is by itself, it doesn't quite. I think it just lives by itself as a smaller work, and it would probably need a lot more to make it a bigger painting. More of the whole background that gives her a sense of place. At the time when I did it, I was just more having fun with painting her and some of the subtle light reflections in the dress she was wearing that day. So it as a great memory for me, it's fine. I just don't feel it has the worthiness of a large painting. Here's another painting from Catalina Island around the isthmus and the back alley of some buildings with the palm trees. And what I liked is just the almost chaotic element here. There's a little bit of a rose bush that was growing here. It had a few flowers on it, but I just like the chaos to all this, especially the organic element against the geometric element. And then you have the background of the palms, and you can see there's a little bit of wind that day, and the palms are blowing, and hillside in the background. And I just felt it was a fun painting to do. It was more about painting the light and shadow effect on all the elements, the buildings, and the light on the palms and the pattern that palms were making, creating, and against the building. And would this be a bigger painting? I don't see it that much bigger. It's 11 by 14. Maybe, maybe go, maybe at the most twice that size, maybe not even that. And it might need more. You'd maybe have to back away, or I don't know, maybe even coming in closer, or making a vertical out of it and having more of this element down below and having this up above, or maybe it needs more sky and above it to create a quiet area before you get to the chaos that would be to the bottom side of this. So, it's all about what's going to make a better big painting, and sometimes it's just hard to figure it out. Here, this is a painting on location. Again, in Catalina Island. It was at the Isthmus, and it was more the haze. I was really interested in the haze of the day. And I got to be painting some pretty thick paint on this, as you can see. But it was just a haze that I was interested in. I added a few figures in here real carefully just to give a sense of scale to this. I think I might have done one larger painting of this, and it just wasn't that successful. It just didn't work out. But the idea was interesting. And from that, though, the idea of the atmosphere in the same location, this wasn't too far from it, was a place looking down into an area called Cottonwood Beach. And the ruggedness of the backside of Catalina Island and the harmonies. This was late in the afternoon. I couldn't find my study. I did a little study. I think I might have sold it in a workshop. I did a little study of this. And before the sun went down, we had we had a taxi take a bunch of us out. It's very expensive to take a taxi out to the backside of the island. You can't drive yourself. You can't rent a car and drive over there. That's not possible on the island, but you can have a taxi take you out and then pick you up. And it cost about $300, but it was a bunch of us artists that did that. And we painted all day, and then we had a prescribed time when the taxi was to pick us up. So I did a small little study that looked somewhat like this. It was more of a horizontal rectangle, and the taxi came, and I'm packing my gear up, put it into the taxi, and looked around, and the sun was already down at that point. Here the sun is going down, and its reflection on the ocean. You can't even see the top of the ocean, and the sun is going down. And as I got in, just about to get into the taxi, and we're going to leave, I looked back, and clouds. Atmosphere was starting to build up into this canyon area. And sometimes that'll happen in the evening time. The sun, during the daytime, the sun is too bright and warm, and atmosphere won't develop. But later on, as the sun goes down, it'll build up. So I took a few shots, and it wasn't anything this much. It probably was just a meager few little clouds that were starting to build up. And then I developed a much more interesting effect with the clouds building up, but still with the reflection on the water. And that's what I really enjoyed doing. From that came a couple other pages. There was a slight sense of an old road. I made it much more apparent to take you down to the focal point. Obviously, the focal point in this is the rocks down below. Someone might say, well, why isn't this the focal point? And why couldn't that be a competition to the focal point? And I think it's more because it's a dark area that you need, excuse me, in the foreground to make sure that this stays ahead, and it helps to validate this going down here, over to here, down to there, and then finally going back and going up further up here. A lot of lost edges. The clouds help to soften that. The reflection brings you down here. These smaller elements, again, sometimes pattern and contrast. This being a contrast of small and positive and negative is the contrast to this being large and bold, and if you want to put it that way, and your eye is more attracted to this. If you squint down, your eye, even though your eye might find this, but your eye will immediately go down to this area here. And I'll leave it up for a second, squint, and take a look. Close your eyes and open your eyes up, and your eyes will want to go to that spot. A huge angle bringing you down here. here, here, and here. That is the abstract positive negative. A little bit less here, a little bit more here as far as the volume of light and dark in this painting. Probably three quarters dark, 1/4 light, or maybe 2/3, 1/3. Probably that's probably a closer division. So that was the strength and dynamics of that composition. So that I could see. This is a 30 by 30, but I could see this easily being even a 60 by 60 that could work out. Here's another version of that same scene, a little bit different, where I actually show the horizon line with the glare on the water, much more painted with the glare. I added some of these old, sometimes there are some old palm trees. There are some in this area. There's none on this hillside. I brought those in, added a few over here to break up that road and also validate these back and forth. And even though it may not live in the scene itself, it doesn't look foreign to the scene, and it works very, very nicely. So that was again another version. This was a 30 by 40 scene of that same idea, all spawned again kind of from this to begin with, and a study that I did of this area here. And then finally doing a couple different versions. And one of the last ideas was something that I worked this whole thing up in the studio. Because I live in close to the Delaware River, they do a reenactment of the Washington crossing every Christmas day in the morning. And even though it's during the actual event of Washington crossing the Delaware happened in the dark of the evening, and you know the whole story behind the surprise of the Hessians that Washington and all his soldiers and followers and people that were trying to overcome the British, they surprised them, and so that was the whole story, obviously, if you know that. And so I went there during the daytime and got all these wonderful shots of people in the costumes and the boats themselves that are very much like the boats that they did use to bring the people across the water. I think I have to go back here. Whoops. Okay, I have to get rid of that. Forget how to get rid of that here. That should be not there. Let's see if I can get rid of this. Well, somehow I got that line in there and it wasn't supposed to be in there. Well, anyway, what I did is took the daytime photographs and I turned them into more of a nocturne at night, and I did give it a full moon light effect, so that it had an interesting reflection, and I could get the soldier crossing the plank. They put planks out to get the people to ford across and onto the shoreline, and you could see some of the other soldiers, and then some here that are very subtly going back in the distance here, and there's quite a few, and obviously I came more. But that was the idea that came from a smaller, actually came from all the photographs. I did some small little studies to work out the composition I wanted, but the idea was already there in my mind of doing it fairly large. I think this was maybe I'm trying to think if it was a 24-36 size, and here again it could be much bigger. I'm working on another idea of they also during that evening they brought over horses, and they brought over not only people in the boats and soldiers and other people that were following, just people from the area. They weren't soldiers, but they were militia people. They brought them over in boats, but they also brought over horses. And you can imagine the chaos. So I'm working on it's going to be a large painting of the chaos of unloading horses and the chaos with the river and the ice, and obviously we've seen a historic painting that was done by a French artist. I can't think of his name right now, that you might have seen. If you haven't seen it, you can look up Washington crossing the Delaware. There you'll see the historic scene of Washington in one of the boats, and they're rowing across, and they're all dressed up in clothing that they had at the time. Very meager clothing for the conditions, and a lot of people just about froze to death. You can almost imagine how cold it could have been. They had wrapped their heads with sometimes claws to keep their ears warm around their hats and so forth. And again, some of the militia people had different types of hats and so forth. So anyways, that was the idea. It was a fun project, and I'm going to continue with working up to more ideas from that, or more paintings, I should say, from that particular idea. So again, some ideas work great when they're done larger. Other ideas just live maybe just as they are, and will never become, and shouldn't maybe become, candidates for a bigger painting. I sometimes had to go through the exercise of doing it, and then finally saying, gosh, you know what, I just made a big painting. It doesn't have enough interest, and sometimes I can't do enough to something to make it work. This little painting here, I couldn't find my image, but it was a little study from over in France, and was just looking down off a bridge area, and shadow and light pattern, and these little boats, and a little, almost like a little old kayak, and another boat, and I just like that. Would it work as a huge painting? Probably not. It lived fine as a little painting, and wouldn't survive again as a larger format. So keep that in mind when you have your ideas for this workshop. Some ideas, that's why I really suggest that you have a number of ideas. Look at them and compare them. When you go to museums, take a look at what has been developed into a large painting, and maybe other paintings that are on the walls that didn't, that maybe could have, but maybe there's some ideas that just wouldn't look grand if it was made larger, and maybe just lives as it is. So, but there's others that we do as ideas that we almost can anticipate the enormous size, that it could still carry a beautiful message. So anyways, enjoy your projects. Keep your brush to the canvas.
I've been teaching art workshops for over 20 years. Prompted by many students' requests, I created this particular Study to Studio course. This course is developed for either the indoor or outdoor painter. The translation from a reference study to a larger studio painting has always been a challenging process. In this 4-week course, I defined the tools of my trade, my palette, and an important color mixing demonstration. I will take you through the same exact process which has proven to be successful for me in the studio, including various creative options that will improve the results of your studio efforts. My process of teaching is wrapped around the sound and historic foundations and principles that are the guidelines that defines quality art. I feel confident and believe that you will discover this course to be very beneficial to your future artistic development. Tucson Art Academy's online courses is the new way for art educational opportunities. I hope to see and work with you in this new online course.